men cry. Now, when you say that, you can almost see the women sitting up and getting ready for engage. But look at the men around you. They're very nervous. Well, guys, don't worry. Actually, science has got us covered. Science says that men cry 17 times on average a year. Women, on the other hand, the rest of the year. And I think the reason we don't cry a lot is because nobody cries pretty. You know, men look really ugly when they cry. The good tears, the bad tears, nervous tears, joyful tears, ugly tears. And I remember when I was a little boy, we were very, very poor. And let me step back a little. Just the other day, my mother called me. Now, mothers are dope. And I almost cried when she called me. And let me give you a bit of a background. When I was a boy, we were poor. I've told this story a couple of times. That I think that comedians used us for research. They'd say, you're so poor you can't pay attention. That was me most of my primary school. It was really bad because I remember a time we actually had sugarcane for lunch. And there's a problem with the sugarcane. It was also skinny. You know, there's fat sugarcane and skinny sugarcane. We were poor, I was skinny, we had skinny sugarcane. And I remember once for dinner that my mom borrowed some flour, a cup. It was actually not full. She boiled some water, and that's what we had for dinner. Now, that's not uji, that's not ugali, that's hot water with particles of flour in it. And it became a joke in our house to just laugh about how bad things were. So recently, when my mother called me, I had a lot of things to reflect about. Because when I got my first job, a friend of mine told me, you should put a small standing order for your mother. It makes it easier for you not to always worry whether she has money or she doesn't have money. So there you are, you're making your 20K, you find a way of making sure she has a 2K every month. It increases to 30K salary, you add a little. And you forget about it as you grow in your career and your business, you keep on increasing the money. It's never an issue anymore because you just keep on going. And so my mother had an encounter recently where a neighbor of hers came to borrow. We borrowed a lot. My mother would say, Sam, go look for some sugar. Sam, ask whether I can get a kibiriti, 1 stick of kibiriti. And so when my mother called me recently and said, Sam, I am very, very grateful. I have not lacked for a very long time. I have not borrowed for a very long time. It was a very emotional moment for me. And when I think about it, mothers make us cry. At that moment, my first reaction was, you know how we do it as men, privacy, bathroom, pap, tissue. And even if you are sobbing inside there and you're mocha looking fresh and ready, when a brother asks you what was happening, you say food poisoning. To our mothers will always be boys. So it doesn't count if you cry. If your mother makes you cry, just cry. And this goes to the mother of sons in the room. You will be a reason why your sons will cry. Some good tears, some bad tears, some ugly tears. And sometimes they will cry with you or for you. But they'll probably do it in the bathroom. You will never see. So, when was the first time I cried as a man? For those of you who grew up in the 80s, in the late 80s, we were prepared for circumcision with fear and tremble. No, I didn't cry when I was getting circumcised. Relax. Nobody leaves the room. And I had this small house that my grandfather lived in, and he had passed away. So I straightened it up and bought a pole and a mabati, put it up there. It was really tiny, probably the size of my bathroom today. Just could fit a bed. That would be like the same size with your bathtub, and just a little space to wiggle. And I remember this house was bent this way, so that if you took a photo, you remember the guy who would come with a bicycle and taking photos? If you took a photo in front of that house, it looked like the house was running away, because it looked like that. And this was my house as I went, as I got circumcised. And I came back and I became a man. And most of you would identify with that moment in our life. We become a man. Some embarrassing tears were about to follow. I was assigned my cousin, who was supposed to be your nurse and your doctor to take care of you. So, 3 days later, my cheeky, evil cousin decides to show up with some friends, smiling sheepishly, and a very young, lovely lady, dressed inappropriately for this particular occasion. And I remember praying for them to leave because it was terrifying for me. I had just become a young man, and I can see some of you smiling. And after they left, I had some painful tears to encounter. I did put a straight face for the 5 minutes they were there, as a man had just become. And there's a problem with life is the minute you think you just conquered it, you become something always happens to remind you, humble yourself, you know? And as a man, that's the first time I remember crying. And so it was a really hard thing to deal with, thinking, wow, I just became a man, and I just cried for the most stupid reason I could ever share with anybody. Fast forward, here I am, grown-up man, and I meet a beautiful woman. Now, most good stories, bad stories, ugly stories always start like that. I met a chick. If you say that to guys in a bar, they just sit back and go like, chill, we're having a moment now. But lucky for me, this was a good meeting. And after dating for a while, I decided to go visit her parents. Now, again, there are things in life that remind you where you've come from. Because I remember the first time I walked into their home. Their garage was bigger than our house. Their swimming pool, they had a swimming pool, for starters. The only swimming pool we had was when it flooded and water came to our living room. And I met the dad, who was a man who had worked really hard in his life. And I think he just couldn't believe the guts I had after a short conversation of where I was coming from. And he did see a young man punching above his weight who wanted to date his daughter, which was pretty interesting because a couple of months later, bravely, without culture, I won't say like Bontao, but without anybody having educated me, I walked into that man's living room, I sat him down with his wife and said, I want to marry your daughter. He looked at me and said, go bring your parents. It was the beginning of a very good friendship between me and him. We became such good friends, and we'd talk a lot, and he'd even come to see my business. I'd started a business, I was in town, and, he saw the pride and the ego of a ghetto kid trying to just hack it in life. And so one day he even offered to take me to Current Country Club. And I remember I had to ask my wife-to-be, how do you use the cutlery? She said, dude, outside in. Still doesn't work for me. Just still don't get it. He tried to teach me how to play golf. And trust me, I don't know. I look like I'm killing a snake every time I try to do that. But this man was very dear to me. He became a very good friend. And one Friday, I had gone to see him, just have dinner with him because he was going over the weekend somewhere. And I said, well, come over, I'll bring your daughter, she'll say hi. I just bought my first car. I was actually going for a show-off. I am making it happen, And my car had an accident, but anyway, we ended up to his place, and then he had to drop us back home, and we talked and laughed and said, come tomorrow on Saturday, let's go play golf in Machakas. I said, no, thanks. Figured, man, the whole idea of swinging things and, all that is just not going to be how I spend my Saturday. Saturday night, 3 o'clock in the morning, I received a phone call from my brother-in-law in New York, and he said, hey, Sam, what are you doing? I was just about to tell the guy I'm barbecuing. It's 3 a.m. in the morning. What are you supposed to be doing? But his tone told me that this is serious. I need to take him serious. I said, yeah, what's up, bro? He said, wake up, go to the living room, and don't wake up your wife. I said, okay. So I went to the living room and he said, Sam, we just lost our dad. And I think that was the most terrifying phone call I have received to date in my 39 years. I asked what happened. He said he died on a car accident on his way back from Machakos. So you're the one to break the news. Wow. I sat there for what felt like eternity. And she had already woken up. And she said, something is wrong? I said, yes. Now, being the kid who grew up from crisis to crisis to crisis, everything in my life has always been a crisis. It's so bad that even when there's no crisis, I act out like there is a crisis. So I took up upon myself to just rush and call a few other people, rush over to Machakos, take the body to the morgue there, and then bring it to Lee Funeral Home. And it was a whole week of intense rushing. It wasn't until about the end of the week that I totally got overwhelmed. It totally came down crashing. And I remember I went somewhere and hid in a corner, and I crashed. I cried like a little baby. These are memorable tears for me because I did not know what was happening. And I was torn apart, and I cried and cried until I had somebody ask, Sama alienda wapi? Then, of course, you come out looking like, man, just dust, whatever, both at you. And that's one of the other things that I've noticed with a lot of my friends, that death does break men. But still, we don't want to show our weakness. We don't want to show our vulnerability. We will cry in the privacy of our space. And death is powerful when it comes to men. We are pretty much unable to deal with it because we feel like we should have done something better. We should have helped. We should have solved that. And just as much as death brings tears to our eyes, so does life. 2 years later, we were expecting our firstborn. And me was excited. And nervous parents, first time, okay? Ladies, they pack this bag, has diapers, has it's like really, really looks like a military bag. And she was comfortable, but I said, hey, hon, let's just do a dry run. She said, okay. She's like, let's try this. So me, my nice little car, engine on, I'm seated there looking like Frank Martins in the transporter, chilled out, ready to dash this girl to hospital. We're just going to run to hospital, just do a drive with the bag and come back home. I know. I act out like there's a crisis even when there's no crisis. And so here we are driving to hospital. In my head, I want to imagine how it feels like, the movies, when the water breaks, what happens, how do you act out? Now, brothers in the room, water does not break like it does in the movies. And I learned that within 10 minutes of leaving the compound because she went into labor. I'll give you a quick tip here. If you've never had this experience, do not let your wife sit in the front seat. She will grab the steering wheel. So we end up at hospital, and I am terrified. I'm completely terrified. Every time they hit, she holds my hand. My lovely wife had turned into Hulk Hogan, the Incredible Hulk all put together, and she was killing me. We were both in pain. We end up in hospital, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I've had so many stories of people losing their wives and their children at the hospital. And so I went into the little chapel on the side of the hospital as soon as she'd been admitted, and she was there with the nurses. And I prayed like I had never prayed before. I lay down on the floor, face down, and I prayed. I prayed so much that when I stood up, there was a gentleman who had come in there, and he looked like he was praying for me. Like, whatever crimes I had committed before then, he probably was saying, God, let me not be his next victim. And I went back into the theater, and I was there when my son was delivered again. My hand was crushed, seriously. And our son is turning 10 next in January. 3 kids later, I do not play Frank Martins. I ask, are you sure? Ni leo. Kids make us cry. Kids make us cry so much that as a man, when you have children, you become hormonal. I'm telling you, I know what it feels like. Immediately they are born, you're like, wow, will he be breathing tomorrow morning? You're worried. If they have colic, you're worried whether they'll be okay tomorrow morning. You know, when they sneeze, or when they sneeze and say, they say baba, you cry. Or when you encounter that full diaper, I'm telling you, you will cry. Kids have a way of grabbing our emotions and just make us very vulnerable. Sometimes my 4-year-olds will come to me and give me a hug and say, you're the best daddy in the world. And I feel, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I feel the tears welling up. And then he says, Daddy, can I now play with your phone? Do you have games? So men cry. The men in your life cry. And just because you don't see it, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Thank you very much.